I got all I want, and I got all I need, and I got everything. I got you and me. All I want, I got all I
Welcome
need.
back to Marriage is the Best. The last couple of weeks we've talked about the first stage of marriage, which is obviously the honeymoon phase. And it's been fun to kind of think about and talk through, what honeymoon means and what it usually looks like and what are some of the things that we can observe in that season of relationship. As I was thinking about kind of stage number 2 and how to kind of transition from honeymoon into whatever we're going to call the second phase of marriage, I was thinking through Becca and my early kind of marital dynamics and thinking about how much conflict we had early on in our marriage. After the honeymoon highs kind of came down and the heightened emotions, the heightened chemicals, the heightened passions, and the chaos of our lives started to settle down and reality started to settle in. We found a lot of conflict and a lot of really, really difficult feelings where the honeymoon phase was chock full of high intensity, really kind of over the top expressions of passion and kind of as we talked about in the first couple of episodes on the honeymoon, talking about the disconnect from reality. We experienced a very strong disconnect from reality during kind of the height of our honeymoon phase. Rebecca was in Paris, France on a trip for school because we were in college at the time. And I can recall her wanting to talk to me really regularly while in Paris, France. And then she even went after her kind of 10-day trip that was scheduled with the school. She actually went and visited some friends and a cousin and went all over the world or all over Europe. And then her mother actually hung out with her for a few days. And throughout that whole season, she was reaching out to me. She was trying to connect with me. We were trying to talk. We were trying to coordinate. And I was living in my friend's mother's basement for some of that trip. And just kind of, it was kind of the dream kind of bachelor setup in the sense of not that many responsibilities. I don't think we were paying to sleep in the basement because I think we were waiting to get our first apartment. And I don't know if any of us really had jobs. And so we were all just hanging out, playing disc golf, going disc diving. It was a crazy season. And I remember, because of the way that the honeymoon phase hacked my brain specifically, I was just kind of miserable, even though I was living what would look like my best life. I look back on that and I think, what a missed opportunity to just enjoy something crazy. It was a crazy season of life, but the honeymoon, kind of the chemical and the craziness of that honeymoon phase stole away my ability to see what I had and enjoy what I had and focus on these friends that I had to love on and connect with and go out and be, silly young adults. I think that one of the dangers that we didn't quite talk about in that honeymoon phase is the honeymoon phase, the way that it disconnects us from the reality of our lives often takes away from whatever is going on at that moment in your life. And so let's say that you're in high school and you're kind of going through this honeymoon phase. You're missing the opportunity. Oftentimes people can miss the opportunity to build same-sex relationships with quality people, to invest in relationships or extracurriculars, or to spend good amounts of time doing good, healthy, balanced kinds of things, because the honeymoon kind of hijacks a lot of that process. Now, and then, let's say you were in college and you were dating somebody in high school, and then you transitioned and it's your freshman year of college and you're still dating, and your time and your energy and your effort isn't being put into the college experience, but is kind of being siphoned away to this other relationship that you had and still have. And it detracts from that season. And so one of the things that I kind of observe around our honeymoon experience, and then many honeymoon experiences that I've talked to or interacted with, is that when this dynamic grabs you, it kind of hijacks the season of life that you're in. And when we think about the chemical impact of the honeymoon phase, the relational impact of the honeymoon phase, the environmental, the sociological kind of, everything that's just going on at that time, it makes a lot of sense that the honeymoon phase would have that kind of level of impact based on the disconnect from reality and all of the heightened feelings. What's interesting to me is that we don't necessarily control whether or not we enter into a honeymoon phase of relationship, whether we're in middle school or high school or early college. And there's not a whole lot that parents can do to protect their children from entering in that. There was literally nothing that could have been said or done during that season that I could have received that would have kind of led me away from that, at least in my development and where I was. And so it feels to me very much like a very intense process that I'm not sure if you can adjust it. That's actually one of my questions, is how can you enter into that season of your life? How can you really enter into the honeymoon phase during a healthy season of your life? That's a great question. And then, jumping off of that question, if it's possible to kind of manage entering into the honeymoon phase at the right time, then you could manage to capitalize on all of the experiences around and before and during the honeymoon phase. That would be really just helpful in balancing and creating more well-rounded kind of life and experience. So how do you choose or manage when honeymoon happens? Yeah, okay. Because I know for me, there wasn't anything that anyone could ever have said or done that would have changed it or updated it for me. I was unreachable. I don't know if that was just because I was so immature or I was so locked in on the idea of a spouse, or if there was some deep wounding from my family of origin that kind of created a vulnerability in this area. Because my friends didn't have nearly the same experience that I did, right? So one of my really good friends didn't really date throughout college, found the girl that he wanted to date, dated the girl that he wanted to date after college, dated her for a reasonable amount of time, pursued her, did all the things. They got married, and now they're going to have their fourth child. Really cool, really wonderful story. Now, it doesn't, just because they have a different story doesn't mean that that their dynamic is better or worse than mine and Becca's dynamic. And so even though our honeymoon phase hijacked our lives and their honeymoon phase was more balanced and grounded, doesn't necessarily mean that the work has changed that much when it comes to building a healthy marital foundation. I think their foundation was much stronger and healthier when they started than ours was. Actually, in fact, every single one of my friends basically had a much stronger foundation and was in a much better place when they started their marriages than when Becca and I started ours, which is really fascinating to me. That we could start from such a difficult place, stress, baby on the way, no money, 750 square foot apartment, something like that, no AC, broken parents on both sides, broken marital relationships, all throughout the family of origin stuff. And yet we moved from the most chaotic, most nutty honeymoon phase, codependent out the wazoo, into this stage of a disillusion, breaking down the illusion. I think that's probably what disillusionment it means. We moved from that into the disillusionment, and we worked really, really diligently in this second phase to understand conflict management and to build our confidence in each other and in our relationship. In this disillusionment phase, as the chemicals are wearing off, as the highs and the codependence and the intensity was wearing down, we worked really hard at conflict. And for us, what working really, really hard at conflict meant in this stage, which I would qualify as the first 4-ish years of our marriage, was anything that came up within myself or within Becca that we didn't like, that we didn't appreciate, that wasn't healthy, that wasn't good, that was rubbing us the wrong way, that was bothersome, it got airtime. We allowed for lots and lots of hard, difficult conversations during this disillusionment phase, and we didn't allow anything to get swept under the rug to create some nasty mess that was going to have to get cleaned up later on down the road, or worse yet, would create a bitterness between the two of us that would erode our foundation and create lots of distance within our dynamic long term. So we weren't going to allow anything to get stacked up. I was talking to a client just the other day about how early on in our marriage relationship, the way that we dealt with conflict, the way that we learned to conflict was speak it out as early as you notice it, as best as you can, and work through it to resolve it as quickly as you can. The as you cans are really important there, because at different times we were able to work through different levels of conflict in different speeds. You know, we've had conflict that lasted a week. Actually, probably more in the last 3 years. We had conflicts that lasted much longer. But in these first 4 years of the disillusionment phase of our relationship, we had so often we were thrown into conflict that was small, that needed to be resolved very, right away. I can remember going to bed early on in our marriage and being on I think we got this free king bed from somebody. I can't remember who. It was one of Becca's friends. And so we got this massive king bed. The room was so small that you had to skirt around this bed. It was so impractical and ridiculous, but it was free, and we were blessed by it for a little season. I think we actually ended up, anyways, moving forward. So we've got this king bed, and I remember laying on the furthest side of the bed that I possibly could, facing the opposite direction, staring at the wall because I was upset about something. And I remember learning at that time, going through like the Gottman training, because I think I was in my internship at that time. And I'm laying and I'm angry and I'm on this far side of this bed. I was as far away from her as I possibly could. And I remember like John Gottman's words of like turning toward versus turning away. And are you going to allow your marriage to be a place that you are turning away from? Are you going to create a pattern, a habit, a consistent rhythm in your life and in your marriage where you are turning away from Becca? And I thought to myself, no, how dumb, how silly is that? How inappropriate is that? And I'm probably 23, at the time. And so I'm turning toward her, and I turn my body and I get as close as I can to her, and I just snuggle in, and there's this moment of connection. And all of a sudden, the turning away, the thing that I was angry with, that bitter seed, right, that I was watering and wanting to grow within me, it got rooted out. It got plucked out of the ground. So our marriage relationship could stay healthy and stay weeded. And so turning toward her in that moment and wrapping my arms around her, and we probably had a verbal exchange, but I don't really remember that part of it. I simply remember that realization of, am I going to allow whatever conflict we are facing right now to kind of root down and create bitterness, would be one analogy. Or to create this rift, right? To allow the rift to grow as opposed to turning toward her and forcing us back into alignment and connection. So that would be, one way of thinking about this disillusionment idea is, as the illusion wears off, the work begins. So you're no longer connected to your spouse, right? Because of chemicals and heightened chaotic desires and sexuality and all of that. Instead, the work begins to start to say, I chose you then because you're wicked attractive and I'm very into you and you make me laugh and I love it when you laugh and your smile is wonderful. Into, you're pissing me off. You're making me really, really angry now. And I don't know if I want to still choose you, but I'm going to. I still choose you. I'm going to turn toward you. I'm going to continue to choose you, even when it's hard and even when it sucks and even when we seem so distant or so disconnected and even when we're not being physical and we're not being intimate and even when there's this miscommunication or missed expectations, I'm still going to choose you. And the values that we talked about that are kind of foundational in the honeymoon phase to kind of screen into your relationship, those values as you're moving through that. If you're screening in really good values, then there's a really solid foundation to continue to build on. But there's still a lot of work that has to happen within the area of conflict resolution, entering into many, many, many conflicts throughout time, and creating patterns and habits of turning toward your spouse versus allowing those conflicts to create the rifts or the bitter roots or whatever you want to say, that kind of tears down the relationship or it just makes the relationship much more difficult. So the illusion is wearing off. All of those really, really heightened emotions and feelings are coming down. Reality is setting in. The reality of life's pressures and stresses are kind of coming into full view. And where you used to have this break from reality, which was allowing you not to see the hardship and the stress and the difficulty, or was maybe softening it or creating a haze around it. Instead of that, there's an increased clarity in who this person is, in how they operate, in what they're like, in what their quirks are, in all of those things. And in recognizing all of those things and having all of the heightened feelings coming down, it creates kind of there's a bit of a harsh reality that sets in, that my marriage is not a honeymoon. My marriage is not always going to feel the way that it felt in the beginning. My marriage is not always going to be represented by the chaotic, crazy, heightened, passionate moments. And as that reality sets in, we have the task of building up our ability to move through conflict and maintain our connection and continue to choose one another through the difficulties and through the conflicts and through reality coming into the picture and through knowing and recognizing and understanding who this person is. I am going to stay connected to you no matter what. I am going to stay connected to you no matter where our conflict takes us. I am going to stay connected to you regardless of your foibles, regardless of your quirks. I am going to stay connected to you, my spouse, whom I chose. Despite the fact that you now look a little bit different to me, despite the fact that the haze has kind of worn off of the honeymoon phase, despite the fact that my chemicals are different and our relationship is a little bit different and the passion is different and the intimacy is different. Despite all of those things, I still choose you. You're still mine. And I still want to continue to pursue you throughout the next stage and phase of our relationship. So if you can move into and through the disillusionment phase, and you can learn to have all the necessary conflicts, and you can turn towards your spouse even when it's difficult, and even when like everything in your being wants you to turn away, and even through, acknowledging and understanding that they have all sorts of interesting things about them that you will learn. And even though they are continuing to learn that you have lots of interesting things about you, and they're going to continue to learn those things, despite all of that, we're going to continue to choose one another. And that's kind of the task. That's kind of the goal. That's kind of what we need in order to move through the disillusionment phase well, and in order to really lean into your spouse. We have to learn those two things, and those first few years are a really good test of that. Now, how you set up your honeymoon phase and how you move through that is going to determine how the disillusionment runs and how maybe difficult it's going to be. Becca and mine was incredibly difficult, but I am so grateful for the work that we put in those 4 years of feeling all of the awful feelings, of having all of the fights and all of the intense moments, of learning to turn toward one another, of learning to date, even when we were pissed, of learning to turn toward, even when that was the furthest thing from what we wanted, and learning to set expectations and failing. Oh my goodness, so much failure in executing holidays, in, executing time away from each other, in setting up any healthy kind of distance within the relationship, right? Creating our own spaces, which I think actually is going to come into play in the third kind of phase more so, as the illusion wears off and as we're kind of sorting things out because things are getting clearer. Now we're going to be moving forward. So now what if you're married right now and you've been married for a really long time? How does this idea of disillusionment affect you now? Well, I have talked to a lot of couples who are still in the disillusionment phase, even though they are very, very far into their relationship. And I've also talked to a lot of couples who didn't ever have the necessary conflicts throughout the disillusionment phase. And they didn't set the groundwork. They didn't set the foundation of how do we move through conflict? How do we set expectations? How do we understand and commit and choose one another, even when it's really hard? So because there's lots of couples who have been married for a very long time and are still really struggling with this, understanding this phase of relationship, of marriage, and understanding the tasks may help you to understand some of the things that you need to work on when it comes to repairing repairing some of the maybe missed developmental stages or maturation that comes as a result of the disillusionment phase. So what that might look like is, how am I moving through conflict with my spouse? How good am I at turning toward them, even when it's really hard, and even when my feelings and my body and my, emotions are wanting me to turn away or run away or allow that bitter root to kind of seed down or root down into my soul? How am I at rooting that up? How am I at repairing my mistakes, of taking ownership, of taking responsibility for the you part? And how am I at pursuing my wife or spouse in general for connection, even in this stage of whatever we're moving through or whatever we're dealing with? All of those things would be really good things to look at, because there may be habits and patterns that you're executing on or moving through that's causing difficulty in your marriage that is actually based on the habits that you set up in this disillusionment phase. As the haze of the honeymoon came down, as reality kind of set in, and the break from reality was broken, now you have, you're going to really see what you have, and what you have is you're going to have to continue to commit to working on this thing with this partner, because you chose them and you're married, and that's that. So yeah, it's interesting to think about. So I don't know if next week we're going to do more disillusionment. If I have more thoughts on it, I'll share it. But if not, then next week we'll probably move into phase number 3. So thank you so much. I think this is our last podcast of the year 2025, which is kind of fun because we've finished a full calendar year of podcasting. We started it in November 2024, and we are now in December of 2025. In fact, it is the 28th as I'm recording. And it is 11:59. So it is still the 28th, and tomorrow will be the 29th when you are listening to this. So we hope that your Christmas was blessed. We didn't do a holiday episode this year, but we may do one next year, because I think that would be really good. Maybe in preparation for the holidays. Maybe we'll talk about holidays like October next year. Next year's first podcast will probably be a numbers game, talking about all the different numbers that we have access to through our service that releases the podcast, looking at, different episodes and different numbers about, downloads and all of that good stuff. So if you're interested in that, you can feel free to check that out. If not, that's okay. If you can go on Spotify or Apple and leave a 5-star review, that would be super cool and very much appreciated. And I think that's all. I think that's pretty much it. So we hope that you're blessed. We hope that this blesses you. And we hope that your marriage stays super strong and healthy in the new year. All right, peace out. This is the end.
All I need, and I got everything. I got you and me. All I want, I got all